there's this sort of like stereotype of publications that come from the leftist progressive lens that we have sacrificed our professionalism, our ethics, and that's just not true.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Our guest is on the line now. Ari Bloomekatz is executive editor at In These Times. He was previously the managing editor of Rethinking Schools. I don't know if you knew that, Adam.
I did not realize that. I'm a longtime fan of Rethinking Schools, so that's really cool.
Also previously managing editor of Tickin magazines and spent several years as staff writer for the Los Angeles Times. You can follow him on Twitter at Bloomekatz, Bloomekatz. Ari, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. Great to see you all this morning.
Glad to have you on. Been trying to get you on for a long time, and one or the other of us has had something come up, so appreciate you taking the time. Glad we could make it happen. And yeah, so I guess, you know, since I just read that and it kind of clicked, I'm interested in your time at Rethinking Schools before we kind of get into what we were planning to talk about. You know, what were you doing there, and what made you want to work at an organization focusing on, you know, education?
Well, thanks so much for asking. You know, Rethinking Schools is a really special publication. It really focuses a lot on sort of like, you know, a Freirean Marxist like model of education and the importance of public education as like fueling revolution and change. And, you know, I was managing editor over there, and, you know, really, really great folks. We're doing a mix of, you know, writing and developing curriculum, along with, you know, working with lots of teachers on, you know, improving their own writing and writing for the first time for publication, and, you know, various things like that. And we put out like a lot of books together too. So one of the main projects I worked on there was a project called Teaching for Black Lives, which is a book that emerged out of the movement for Black Lives. And I was, you know, honored to be production editor on that book, along with Wayne Au, Jesse Hagopian, and Diane Watson, who were the editors on the book there. And, you know, Rethinking Schools has been around for quite a long time as well, several decades. And, you know, just really doing incredible work, but also, you know, struggling with a lot of the things in our industry right now, and particularly in left media.
Right. Well, and that's a good transition to talking about some of this, some of the stuff we had planned, left media and movement media, and we can start with In These Times, where you are currently the executive editor. Just give us a rundown on the magazine and the media project itself, In These Times. You know, what is it? How long has it been around? What are some of the things it focuses on? Stuff like that.
Yeah, so In These Times was, you know, started in 1976, and you know, so we're coming up on almost 50 years now. And if you look at the sort of like initial prospectus for In These Times, what you saw was a, you know, sort of folks positing a really, you know, explicitly socialist publication. It was, you know, going to be a weekly newspaper. It was modeled after Appeal to Reason. In a lot of ways, and was seen as growth out of Appeal to Reason. And, you know, a reminder for folks, you know, Appeal to Reason at some point had, what, like 400,000, 500,000 subscribers, or something like that, a really sort of like monumental force in storytelling and socialist storytelling. And so In These Times, you know, emerged out of that. You know, James Weinstein was, you know, looked at in a lot of ways as the founder, but there was a little bit broader of an organizing committee. And then, you know, there were lots of sponsors and folks really involved in the initial launches, you know, Julian Bond, Noam Chomsky, Barbara Ehrenreich, Barbara Garson, you know, Earl Afari, Paul Sweezy, you know, Carlos Munoz, and several others. And, you know, in this like initial prospectus, you know, they say our purpose in organizing and producing this newspaper is to identify and clarify the struggles against corporate power now multiplying in American society, to bring to explicit consciousness their implicit anti-capitalism, and to point out that a socialist democracy is a necessity for the fulfillment of the popular needs and aspirations underlying these activities. And in many ways, that's still our mission. And we publish a lot about labor. We publish a lot about progressive politics. We publish a lot about justice movements, issues of race, and like we really focus a lot on issues of economic injustice as well. And I've been there about coming up on 2 years right now. It's been a dream of mine to work at In These Times for many years. I've been a real huge fan of the publication, and we're doing some really exciting work right now. And we have a really incredible staff that is doing just really, really excellent journalism. And one of the highlights, and I think one of like sort of like the markers of In These Times is most of our work is explicitly in depth and really investigative. And a lot of the investigative work we're doing has been really impactful, but so has a lot of the other work as well. And we do focus a lot on what we describe as like impact on like actual like change as resulting from the publishing as well. So yeah, really really excellent place. And we're Chicago based. It was when In These Times was founded, it was folks did move to Chicago to start it, and it was very explicitly to be in Chicago. And as sort of like a counter to things on the coasts, and also to really show where like there's a sort of like a central of storytelling power in the Midwest as well, and really builds on like a long history of storytelling and radical storytelling in Chicago. And that's also a big focus of ours. We just put out a special Midwest issue. And in this Midwest issue, one of the things that we were trying to do overall was really, highlight some really special dynamics happening in the Midwest around, labor, around economic injustice, around progressive politics as well. But also to highlight that, I think there's a bit of a news desert in the Midwest as well. And, I grew up in the South, and, one of the reasons I'm such a big fan of y'all's show is because of the work you're doing to highlight, storytelling and news in the South as well, which I think also faces like similar issues.
Definitely, it does. Storytelling everywhere and real investigative stuff. And that is why I appreciate organizations and media projects like In These Times, is because that you were not kidding, and I want to underscore this for people. Like In These Times, of course, you have takes and stuff like that, and maybe some people agree with some of the takes and some of them you don't. But there's some like real investigative stuff that is really well researched and in depth, and I have done like a couple of those pieces for y'all in the past, and I know that the fact-checking process is very frustrating and like and precise, and you have to word things certain ways, and you really do a lot, especially in your reported pieces, but even in opinion pieces that I've written for y'all. You really do a lot to make sure that the things that you're saying in the pages of In These Times are true, and also, like you said, that there's meaning behind the investigations that In These Times conducts, and so I really recommend folks checking it out, and we'll talk about later about ways that that you can subscribe to the magazine. But it's really, really good, and lots of investigative stuff. And like you mentioned, in the South, it's pretty difficult. I think one real kind of diamond in the rough, so to speak, is McKenna Schuler at the Orlando Weekly. She regularly puts out really good reported pieces about what's going on that affects working people in Florida. And when she reports on an issue, and y'all do a similar thing, when she reports on an issue, she doesn't just give you, 8,000 adjunct professors had their union decertified in Florida. That just happened 2 weeks ago. Should be a huge story. It's not, actually. I was about to say it's a huge story, but it's not, unfortunately. But you could just leave it at that, and then she would be like kind of head and shoulders already above a lot of people reporting on labor and business in the South. But then she goes back and she interviews workers who were part of the original organization of these adjunct professor unions. And she talks about some of the things that they won in their contracts that have now been revoked as a result of the decertification of their campaigns. And she just always gives a lot of context in her pieces to whatever the first story, the lead is. She always gives you a lot of context, and that's something that I appreciate about her work, and also about In These Times. And she's written for In These Times before, and so there's not enough people and places doing actual reporting. We have plenty of people giving takes and not enough people doing the reporting. And so I appreciate In These Times a lot for the work that y'all do on that front. And so let's talk about some of the reporting that you have done recently. You said that, you had a issue recently that focused specifically on the Midwest. You are also present at the DNC, covering in particular the protests, but also stuff that was happening inside of the DNC, and talking about the unions and their relationship to what's going on in Israel and with Gaza. And so I'm interested in what are some of the stories that you would like to highlight to our listeners so that they can go back and read it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, first off, McKenna I am so grateful for McKenna and work that McKenna is doing. And also, Hamilton Nolan is in Florida now, but also, does some writing about Florida. He's from there and really doing incredible work. And, I think if it weren't for McKenna, I think a lot of issues involving working people in Florida don't get surfaced. At all. And so McKenna's just, really special in a lot of ways. And I also think, Jacob, the last piece that you wrote for us also, I think is a really good example of what we do and what we're about. Right? You went to this, really important, town and told the story of what happens when, there's a real big factory closure in the town, but also about all of the underlying dynamics that caused it, right? And at the end of the day, one of the dynamics you pointed out that was so critical and important was these huge issues of capital that were getting moved or not moved, and that resulted in these closures over here, and really in many ways the destruction of a town and people's way of life and people's livelihoods. And this is a really, really special work. So, the Midwest issue for me was a really special issue, and in a lot of ways, and there's a number of different articles about it. One of the ones that we're highlighting, this weekend, because it's also the same weekend as the Socialism Conference in Chicago right now, is an article that was written by one of our senior editor, Miles Kampf-Lawson, actually about the history of socialism in the Midwest as well, and sort of where dynamics are around socialism in the Midwest right now as well. One of my favorite pieces was an article by Sarah Jaffe in the issue as well. And Sarah's been writing and covering issues in Minnesota as well as across the country and internationally as well for such a long time. But she has particular expertise in Minnesota as well. And Sarah tells the story of basically how power has been building in Minnesota over the last several years and even more, right? And what Sarah does so incredibly in this piece is that she really looks at how the relationship between labor organizing and justice movements is really sort of what is actually building power and really also affecting sort of the electoral margins there as well. But really it's about, Sarah writes a lot about power and about how people get power, how people are being withheld power and all these various things. And what is happening in Minnesota is really special with labor. And Sarah's been writing a few articles about it. And in many ways, it kind of comes down to what's a little bit of a tagline and could almost be looked at as cheesy in some ways, but it's really not, because people really mean it, which is this tagline of we are stronger when we build together. We are stronger when we're together. And that's actually, it's something, that's a saying that a lot of people, pay lip service to, around the country. But in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, this is something that people really deeply mean, that, organizers really, really deeply consider and have put into practice in a lot of different ways. So, even before this most recent article, Sarah wrote about what had been, sort of 10 years, a decade in the making of folks aligning contract expirations for around the same time and being able to like leverage the power of those contract expirations around the same time. And in so many ways, this is a preview. This is like a small microcosm of what Sean Fain and UAW are putting forth and proposing for May Day 2028, right? Which is for, folks to align, as many contracts to leverage as much power in 2028. And what we saw in Minnesota very recently was how this actually can work and how this actually like plays out. And then Sarah's follow-up article here like really delves more into how power is built in Minnesota as well. So, I thought that article was really special. There was another article by Iman Abdulhadi about Michigan and about how the uncommitted movement sprouted out of Michigan, but really what was behind that, and really about the building of progressive power in Michigan on a number of different levels that sort of like sowed the ground for such a campaign to happen and to take place and to really have a monumental impact on 2024 and where we're going here. So those are two of the articles, three of the articles there that are really great. But there's a whole lot more in that issue that's really special. Folks can go to the website and check out a lot of it, and we're still releasing articles from the issue now.
Hey, 5 seconds, just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
And you mentioned the effort by Sean Fain and the UAW to get other unions to align contracts with their expiration of May 1st, 2028. And in addition to the UAW pushing this, through their own connections with other unions, there is a collection of central labor councils and state federations that are also pushing for resolutions endorsing Sean Fain's call, independently of the UAW, but endorsing Sean Fain's call to align contracts. If anybody's listening that is a part of a CLC, Central Labor Council, or state federation, and you didn't know this, that's weird, because our labor council was actually the first. Our labor council was the first to pass this resolution, so I'm very proud of that. Bargaintogether.org is where folks can find template resolutions, frequently asked questions, and stuff like that. Get resources for trying to pass this resolution at your own CLC, and get some kind of tips and stuff for following up with your affiliates after you pass the resolution. Because following up, much like a union contract, following up on the resolution is the thing that's actually going to make it happen. Passing a resolution as Central Labor Council itself it's not self-enforcing. You have to you want to follow up with your affiliates, help them remember when they start renegotiating another contract, and so that's something. If folks are involved in their labor councils, you can check that out. I'm on the interim steering committee of that effort. But that brings us to a lot of your reporting focuses on labor, as you mentioned, and talked about, and I alluded to. And you're in Chicago. You mentioned that being in Chicago is very important, and in these times has a very strong relationship, for example, with the Chicago Teachers Union, and Brandon Johnson, the current mayor, who came out of the Chicago Teachers Union. And you have strong relationships with unions across the country, both locally and internationally. And those ties are important for being, being accountable to movements and having sources and learning about stories and things like that. So those ties are all really important, but they can also be something of like a tightrope that you have to walk, right? Because just because you have a relationship with a union or a person or an organization doesn't mean that you always agree with them. And sometimes you might feel obligated to report on something that you feel like they're not doing exactly right, or they're not exactly following their principles in the ways that you had originally envisioned them, or their supporters envisioned them. And so, this is something that that we constantly have to wrestle with as, you know, a much smaller kind of project on a much smaller scale, but it is something that we have to wrestle with, as you know. And unions fund our program. I think something like probably 60-70% of our funding comes from unions, and so that presents a conundrum, right? If, you know, something happens in those unions that we disagree with, and, you know, there are, you know, there are tensions there. And so as the executive editor of In These Times, how do you wrestle with those tensions, you know, in cooperation with your staff and your partners at In These Times? How do you wrestle with those tensions?
Yeah, that's a great question. In some ways, you know, I'm really, you know, lucky also to have, you know, you know, executive director, an editorial director here that, and a whole staff, honestly, that, you know, really believes in, you know, honesty, transparency, and that is actually, you know, more helpful to, you know, our movements and to, you know, everybody, honestly, if we like don't hold back when there is anything to say, you know, when it's a, you know, when there's critique that's necessary, when there's, you know, things to highlight that are, you know, positive and things like that, we don't, you know, hold back in any way. And what we found, you know, what I found over the last couple of years, and what I think In These Times has found over, you know, its lifespan, is that that actually earns like you more respect at the end of the day from your peers and from folks that you are in community with, is if you're being, you know, honest and transparent, and that if your work is based in fact, it's based in accuracy, and it's 100%, you know, ethical and professional. And that's, you know, one of the things I've really, you know, that I have a lot of pride in about In These Times, is that I think that there's oftentimes this sort of like stereotype of, you know, publications that come from, you know, a bit more like of a leftist, like progressive lens, that we have somehow like sacrificed our professionalism, our ethics, you know, and our desire for 100% like accuracy. And that's just not true. And I think that's, you know, the same for you, and the same for, you know, all of like, you know, folks that we consider in our ecosystem, is like, that's a, you know, label that's been, you know, thrust upon us to try and like discredit, you know, more progressive media at the end of the day. But that's not how we operate. Like, that's just not where we are. Like, we care like deeply about these issues, and we care deeply about accuracy. We care deeply about transparency, and we care deeply being ethical at the end of the day. And so, you know, it's really great to be, you know, at a publication where I've got like huge support in, you know, that sort of like execution of our content at the end of the day. But it's also, you know, a reminder for me about how corporate media, you know, always keeps trying to undercut the work that we do, right? Like, if we are beholden to these, you know, to like labor, or if we're beholden to any group like in particular, or any person in particular, you know, that's how corporate media tries to undercut us, and tries to, you know, oh, like you can dismiss all of the work that they're doing because look how beholden they are and things like that. Meanwhile, like, you know, one, that's not true, but then meanwhile, like, let's look who like they're beholden to, like at the end of the day as well. You know, like, let's look at, you know, I mean, speaking of like Chicago, and, you know, not to speak totally like ill, you know, of the dead, but let's look at Sam Zell, you know, operated the Tribune company for a long time as well. Like, let's look at like who corporate media is actually beholden to. And, you know, I think that one of the ways they try to maintain their power is by distracting readers from going to our outlet, by saying, no, that's not real journalism, that's not real stuff, you know? And so that's, you know, that's how we walk that like, you know, tightrope as well. But, you know, like, I think like with anything where you're working with sources, you know, it can get a little tricky at times. And, you know, that's why we do the work we do, and, you know, you try to figure it out at the end of the day, right?
Right, right. Well, yeah, like you said, it's a tightrope that you have to walk, but you do have to, you have to walk it. And I think you're right that ultimately, if you can show yourself to have a certain level of independence, even from people that are quote unquote on your team, then you do get respect at the very least among the readership, if not from those people that ultimately you may have to criticize once in a while. And so with, moving from kind of thinking about how to deal with those tensions and be a partner while also being kind of an accountability mechanism, what do you think some best practices are for building movement media? Thinking like very selfishly for a second, I mean, we have things that we would like to do that we are constantly hamstrung by our budget on. I mean, we can't, there's just a lot of things that we can't do that we would love to do that I think that folks in Alabama and the South deserve that we're just not able to do. And a lot of, I mean, probably basically every progressive left-wing movement media organization has things like that they feel like they would love to be able to do, but they don't have the funding or the capacity or the partnerships to be able to actually execute. And so to be able to do that, you have to grow, you have to build, you have to sometimes partner with people. So what are some of those best practices for doing that work of building media that is, a partner to movements and it can be used as an organizing tool for movements?
Yeah, so I mean, I think you hit, on something, really special, like towards the end there too, which is like, if we're like organizing, right? And do we see journalism and storytelling as inherently an organizing project? And my, assertion is that yes, like storytelling is inherently an organizing project, no matter sort of like the level of, or type of like storytelling that you're doing. You don't tell stories to tell stories alone, right? You don't tell stories in, a echo chamber. You don't tell stories like in a vacuum. You tell stories because you want to be organizing folks. And if you're thinking about, journalism and storytelling from that like organizing perspective, when we don't have the resources that a lot of corporate media has, or other outlets might have, right? Then it's like, okay, so how can we organize to actually still assert and do like the level of storytelling that we want to do? And one of the examples that I've been talking about lately is from the DNC. And during the DNC, in these times, partnered up with The Real News to produce a daily, DNC newsletter for like readers that really brought like a roundup of left media. And even though like, it was in these times and The Real News that were doing a lot of it, we were really actually like in partnership with a lot of different organizations like around it. So we were in partnership and working with Truth Out. We talked with The Nation about a lot of different stuff, Jacobin as well. And Counterpunch, a lot of different outlets were like involved in sort of the creation and execution of this newsletter and in the content of the newsletter. We shared resources on photographers on the ground. We, sort of like, opened up content to different outlets to share and to amplify voices and things like that. And the way that I thought about this, and when we were sort of like conceiving of this project in particular, the way I was thinking about it was like, how are we going to basically build power and assert power as independent media at the DNC? And, the onslaught of corporate media and reporters who honestly had no idea like what they were doing. And they were all coming into Chicago. And, I worked with several of these folks, in, my previous corporate media life. Really showed just like a fundamental basic like lack of understanding of anything regarding like, the struggle for Palestinian liberation, the, like, any sense of like labor, any dynamics, who like people were on the ground that were actually, folks that would know what was going on and things like that, right? And this happens like all the time, right? Which is there's an event, there's something, a big breaking news issue or something like that. Corporate media like flocks in, swoops in, does the flyover stuff, writes a bunch of really bad, articles that get, that produce like, messages of, violence. At the DNC here, like you could actually like sort of like taste, it was like palpable how like disappointed like corporate media was that there was violence and bloodshed like at the DNC. They hyped it up so much for so long, so many months, and the payoff was just like not there. And they just like could not like stand it. You could actually like sort of see it. This like weird disappointment in corporate media there. And so this like partnership that we did though, like for me really asserted a lot of like power for like independent media and gave readers somewhere to go to actually get real, news on the ground. And I'm really proud of that project. And, we just launched and we're part of this Movement Media Alliance that just launched recently as well. And that's like sort of taking some of the similar like philosophy there and then, looking at it much larger. And what we can do as a collective.
Yeah, what are some of the things that the Movement Media Alliance would like to do? And I guess who are some other people that are a part? You have some of the same names that you mentioned already that are part of this alliance. But what are the goals of the Movement Media Alliance, and what does it mean, like kind of materially for the organizations that are a part?
Yeah, so Maya Schwenmore and Laura Waite. Maya's with Truth Out, Laura's with Prism, published an op-ed recently about the launch of Movement Media Alliance that I thought was really special. And some of the other organizations in there include like Convergence, Waging Nonviolence, Scalawag, Baltimore Beats, The Forge, Haymarket Books is also part of it, and several other folks as well. And, the way that I've been thinking about it also is that one of the reasons that I think we, as, sort of a progressive media ecosystem struggle is because we are literally atomized, like from each other all of the time. We are like actually like separated. And some of this I think is a real result of how corporate media has done, and I think, Gannett is, a real big player in this, like has come in to sort of like dominate markets and then starve those markets at the end of the day of like information, right? And so like we have this like sort of like corporate media like takeover, pushing out of journalists, like really like sort of like doing like major cuts and things like that. And then you have these like huge like swaths of the nation, right, that are actually like really lacking in like a lot of like, honest and real storytelling at the end of the day. And so all of our projects have sort of like popped up, right, over, the last, 50, 60 years. And so to try and like, meet like readers like where with the information that they need, right? We've sort of like been created as like a bit of an atomized ecosystem at the end of the day. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is about power and about how, the corporate media, I think, loves that we're not all unified and like working together in a lot of ways, right? They love that like our budgets are all, like separated at the end of the day, that we're all like not necessarily like working in, larger newsrooms together and things like that. And I think there is like, you have to sort of like balance that with like a combination of like how deeply important it is for there to be community journalism and community-centered like journalism at the end of the day, and to have outlets that really like speak directly to not only like local communities, but also like, particular groupings and things like that. And so I think like what the Movement Media Alliance is trying to do is like balance two things, right? Is balance the need for like really community-centered reporting in a lot of places, and then also how we can like build like more like power like together. And, some of that is around resources, right? Is around like how we like all, like pay for, various things, benefits, but also like how we all pay for different services and things like that. One of the conversations I was having with Truth Out, recently was, they have like, illustrators on staff, right? We don't have illustrators on staff like here, right? Are there ways that like we can work together to like share resources there? There are things, the Real News like specializes in a lot of video and audio work, right? That's not like something that we, do a ton of. So are there ways that we can work together there? And all of our, groupings in this Movement Media Alliance, people really do have real expertise in different areas with, different, things. And so it's about we sort of like leverage like each other's like work and brilliance and genius at the end of the day.
I've been thinking through something that there are like two other union radio programs that do kind of similar work to us. One in Pennsylvania and one in Ohio. And I've thought through like a similar thing. If we wondered if we could try to do some sort of official partnership and see how we could share resources, since we're all doing like I said, a very similar thing. So I think that that's all really good, and it's really cool to see people coming together to cooperate and organize when it would be so easy to see yourselves in competition. Like, oh, if somebody reads in these times, maybe, if they read this in these Times article, maybe they're not reading this Truth Out article. Or if they watch this Real News video, maybe they're not going to listen to this Jacobin podcast or something like that. And so it's really cool to see so many organizations, trying to put aside that sort of, and there's some amount of good that can come from competition, like friendly competition, but really I think it has more of a negative effect, particularly in spaces like these, than it does positive. And so I'm really happy to see that kind of cooperation and think it's important, and look forward to seeing the benefits that come out of that. And I think that I think that the readers and listeners and viewers of these various organizations will too.
Yeah. And I think like some of that competition, right, is about like, who are we in competition with, right? And, sometimes like, sometimes the way we like measure competition, right, is like who gets like the most page views on a piece, or who like, gets like, a more high profile byline or something like that, right? And I think that can often be a distraction, and it's a distraction that I, am guilty of sometimes falling into, and that I've, really, done a lot of work to like break out of like that mindset too. Because when I think about competition right now, I don't think about competition with anybody in, what we might describe as like progressive or like movement media. I am in competition for like the public square and for like where public like discourse is right now. And I think that like we need to like recognize that there is like a fundamental like onslaught, and has been for quite a long time, from General Otis at the very least, at the LA Times, to really be an assault on working people in this country. And it is a type of media that is designed to completely dominate the airwaves, to completely dominate all of print, to completely dominate everything, right? It can only really exist and work if it is seen as journalism, if it is seen as like the journalism, right? The actual thing, right? Which is then where we get into places where it's like, well, what do you call us? Like, are we movement media? Are we not journalism? Are we not storytelling? And, I think that like, it's important to like define ourselves in a lot of ways, but I see us in competition for like the public square. I see us like in competition for like, people who are like Elon Musk, right? And are like putting out lots and lots of not only just information, but are putting out lots and lots of, racist, anti-Semitic, really like problematic fascist like language, right? And things like that. So I see us like in competition with those folks, right? That is like where we need to like really like remember like where the fight is. And for me, like the fight is for like the public square. And like we are in a place where like, I think we're in a place where independent media is like really having a resurgence. Like really, I think more and more readers are like gravitating and understanding the importance of independent media, particularly as corporate media is doing a fantastic job self-destructing. But like for me, that's like where the competition is, and like I really try to keep my my like head wrapped around that.
Right. I think that's a good place to be. So we've been talking to Ari Bloomekatz, executive editor for In These Times magazine. Ari, In These Times offers free print subscriptions for both members of DSA and union members. Where can people take advantage of that?
Yeah, if you are having a hard time ever finding it, just type into Google free union sub In These Times or free DSA subscription In These Times. But one of the easy places to go is just bit.ly ITT free union sub, and you can sign up there. It's a really like wonderful program that we're really blessed to have and work with the Puffin Foundation with to offer these subscriptions for union members and also for DSA members as well. And like what I would suggest is not only if folks like sign up for themselves, but please share with your locals, please share with your listservs as well, and please give us your feedback on what you like, what you don't like, what you find moving, what you find helpful, and as well, because we do also really want to be responsive and accountable to readers.
Fantastic. Ari, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. You've been very generous with your time. Thank you for the work that you do at In These Times, and look forward to reading the next issue when it comes to the House.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Really big fan of Valley Labor Report and all the work you all do. It's really remarkable and really special. Really honored to be on.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. All right, folks. Again, that was Ari Bloomekatz, executive editor for In These Times magazine. Check it out. Get a free subscription if you are a union member or a DSA member. And if you're not a union member or a DSA member, you should still get a subscription, and you should
fix that other problem.
Yeah, fix that other problem. Member, right? Yeah, exactly. And then if you get a free subscription, you should also probably make a donation if you have the financial if you have the financial ability to. I donate occasionally to In These Times, so I recommend other people do as well. It's a good publication. Like I said at the top, very few organizations do the kind of in-depth reporting that they do, so recommend checking it out.
Right. In These Times, Labor Notes, Real News Network, and some of these other folks that you mentioned are really just carrying the weight for folks out there in terms of trying to tell the truth about what's happening in this country and what life is like for working people. So really appreciate all the good work they're doing. Couldn't recommend it enough. Please do subscribe and check it out and read their stuff. Some of our very dear friends have written for that. You mentioned yourself have been in it, but Kim Kelly, Hamilton Nolan, some really great writers that are in the subscription every month.
Kim Kelly is now a columnist. She has, it's a regular thing. I don't know how often, but she's a regular columnist now for In These Times, and she wrote a big expose on black lung for them. And I read so much news that it's not common at all that I get like emotional reading something. And I almost cried reading that piece that she wrote about black lung. Very moving. And Ari was talking about like impact journalism, like that piece and her other reporting. She didn't just write one piece on black lung. She's been writing a lot about black lung and coal miners over the last few years. And that piece was a very big reason for that they were able to get this silica rule passed in the Department of Labor. It kind of galvanized people around that, and so really making a difference with the work that she's doing for In These Times and the work that they are executing over there. So really, really good stuff. Recommend it. Sign up.
Yeah, and I'm interested in this Movement Media Alliance and what takes shape there.
Yeah. Might even have to reach out at some point and see if there's an opening for a radio program.
Yeah. If they have room for little old us.
Little old us. That's right.
We're holding it down
Yeah,
in the
didn't wanna-
southern airwaves, so
That's right. Didn't want to put Ari on the spot. Couldn't ask him that while he was on. Didn't want to make it awkward if he said no. But we might reach out. We'll see. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.